if there's one bit of advice I'd give any company right now to give yourselves a better chance of succeeding, to attract the best talent, and to make it a really healthy work environment, it is to be really intentional about the social connections in your organization.
Yeah, it just reminded me of another example where we'd just been through all this feedback training, and then I don't know, maybe a couple of months later, manager was recalling that they were in a sales meeting, and some new, relatively low grade person coming from external, been through all the training, so he's like, well, this is, with the right intentions, well, this must be what we would need to do. This is the culture of this new place. Gave feedback to his boss who was running the meeting after the meeting, so not in front of everybody, but then obviously their boss was mates with the person I was speaking to, and was like, who's this guy coming in telling me, what to do? He's like, well, you wanted this to be the culture of the company, but you don't like it when he's giving you feedback. You just wanted to give him feedback. So it's I guess a cultural issue of it needs to go both ways. Like you say, the manager needs to get feedback from beneath to show the culture of that's what you want the culture to be, I guess.
That is my third big bugbear about culture. You've beautifully managed to craft this discussion so that you brought out the other two, but the third one for me is dishonest culture, in that you project a culture of, isn't this place amazing? We've got all these values. This is what it's like to work here. These are videos of our people talking about culture on your website and socials. But then the lived experience is so different to how it's advertised. If you've got your recruitment team set up to test people and decide on the right candidates based on the values and everything that you've put up on the website, you're not only attracting the talent that is aligning their values with what the company is saying, you're then testing the candidates in that. So the experience of the candidate is, wow, this is real. This company is exactly what I want. But then that first interaction with a manager or somebody like that, and you get a different experience of that culture, I think it's the number one reason why people leave in the first 6 months, is that the cultural kind of dissonance between what they expected and the reality. I think it's so common, especially, I think there was a trend after the pandemic for companies to really sell how their culture was externally. And I think there's just such a gap between a lot of what those companies are selling themselves as to what they're like in reality.
Yeah, and I guess that's also looking back. One of the first companies I worked for after university, it was a tiny, relatively small manufacturing company that then merged it with 3 other ones, so it got bigger, a lot quicker, quadrupled in size, and then got acquired by a global company. But they hadn't managed the integration of people very well, which I guess is a common underestimation of effort to align the cultures of when you're merging. And then the large acquirer didn't really do anything to address even operationally how those 4 work together, and culturally how they work together, and their culture on top. But probably from the top down, they were like, well, this, just assuming everything's okay, or HR got the gist a lot quicker than the rest of the organization. So yeah, same example where we've got they're externally facing, this is a great company to work for, it's a global company, but we've got these values, blah blah blah, and then someone comes in, it's like, oh my god, this is an absolute mess. There's nothing like what you said. And yeah, we used to have literally people start and leave on the same day, which is clearly not great. Because it's the HR person has told me all this stuff, and I've come into the office this absolute chaos and nothing like the culture that I've been sold. But I guess with the best intentions, it's well, that's what they want the company to be. But I guess they've gone externally focused first before actually fixing it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real big bugbear of mine, but one of the best interview experiences I ever had was when I went through a process with Google a while ago, quite a long time ago now. And I forget exactly how it happened, but there was a series of interviews with Google, various different people across the company, and they're very clear around what they're testing you for. They're I think they're great at explaining what each stage is for and what you'll expect for each stage. It feels like they're setting you up to succeed rather than trying to catch you out. And unlike a lot of the companies that I've experienced, it's very structured in the way that they do it. So it's not therefore down to some person's subjective opinion as to whether they like you or not. There's a lot of structure around it. So it was a really good experience. But my favorite part of the whole process was the consistent question and discussion that they had with me around how I would cope with ambiguity. And they kept saying, look, it's really ambiguous here. There's not the kind of, it's like a startup. There's not a structure. There's not a kind of process set up for everything. So often you're having to make something for the first time or think yourself how to do something because there's not an existing precedent. And I loved that because they were so honest about what it was like there. And I felt much more bought in by the fact that they said, you need to be okay with this if you're going to go through the process because this is what it's like. And I think that is such a strong way to approach how you recruit and how you talk about your culture externally. What is it that's amazing, but also what are the things that are difficult that some might find challenging?
Yeah, and I think, like I said on one of the other podcasts that we recorded, which might not be out by the time this one comes out, is just like having the company just be honest, that you can get behind it, like good or bad. It's like dating. It's like at least get rejected for being yourself rather than pretending to get rejected. It's like, I'm not even like that. Same with like trying to get work in a business. Like, you want to attract the right people from like what it's actually like to work there, rather than the facade of what it's like to work there. Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned that I expertly crafted the interview to hit all 3 points of your culture. Would you mind just summarising what they are? Those 3 points.
Yes, I think. Well, I guess we opened this up with a discussion around some of the trends that I'm seeing around culture in the variety of companies that I'm working with, and the 3 things that I'm spending time on the most, I think, are one is designing an intentional culture. So how do you take the ambition of a company and then be really intentional in how you design that into behaviors and values, etc., that give the best likelihood of the company achieving its goals because you're thinking about how your people work and how they work together. That's the first one. The second one is the variance of culture across an organization. So most companies have lots of subcultures, but how do you create consistency in that experience of culture across the organization, which stops there being all of these silos, stops the intercompany tension that exists, the miscommunication and the noise that happens because people are working differently and making different types of decisions, not against a common set of principles and values. And then the third one was the dishonesty. So a company advertising themselves to be something different than they are in terms of their culture and then the lived experience of that culture in the organization. They're the 3 things that I'm spending most of my time talking about to organizations at the moment.
Interesting. And how do you interact with the company? So like if a company wanted to work with you, how do you usually work with them? Like workshops or what's the sort of mechanism of getting them to work in a better way?
So I start with the design. What's the design that we need? And then I create that with them. Most companies have got a set of values, so that's great. We can keep those, we can change those. I don't mind really. They're often, the values of a company are often a legacy, a tradition, a history of the company. So I think they're important because they're the identity. So I don't like to change the values if I don't have to, but we can if we like. But the first thing I do is that design, and I go through a series of workshops with the leadership team because it has to start with the ambition, where they're going, and then with different stakeholders and people across the organization to get a sense of the other ingredients of that design. Things like the valued behaviors, what's tolerated, what's not tolerated, adding context to those values is important. But then equally, what's the customer brand? What do you want your customers of the future to think of you? Because the behaviors that you craft today, the culture you design today, has to serve the customers of tomorrow. That's the point. Otherwise, you're not going to grow. So I mash those things all together. That's all kind of workshop stuff. And then I manifest it in some way. I kind of like create a visual or an experience where people inside and outside the company can consume what that design is in a way that's engaging and interesting. So it creates a common understanding and a common language around what that culture design is. And then I start to embed it. So the embedding phase is then, the most crucial audience here are the leaders in the organization, all managers and leaders at all levels, and they've got to be the cultural custodians of that design. And so then the training is all about how do you help them go on this journey of understanding what it is, what the benefit is to them, how it will elevate their team performance, and then what do they practically need to do, practice and experiment to then move the company from where it is towards this consistent design that we've created. That's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, I think that's really needed, because I guess as soon as someone says company values, I don't know if it's because I've been jaded in the past, but I just think amorphous blob of generic BS that doesn't steer any decision. So it's like, we want integrity, we want quality, we want values. Like, how does that influence what decision I make day in, day out? Where it's like turning that into like something actionable. So how are you actually going to behave, Mr. Manager, middle manager, to fit in with those? I think is the bit that's missing in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, but values. I prefer valued behaviors when I talk about values. If you've got a value up on your wall of like, let's be innovative, it means nothing to anybody.
Yeah.
But if you can create a set of tolerated and expected behaviors, but equally ones that you don't tolerate around that, and that helps guide decisions in a more consistent way. And it means that managers have a clear way to lead their teams. It means people have a clear understanding of what is expected and what's not. If you leave them open to interpretation, you get an Uber type of example, when they got into so much trouble, but they had this, I think it was 20 leadership principles or something, or 16, I forget how many. But in there were some really interesting sentences that you could interpret in very different ways. And, the behaviors that were exhibited across that organization were horrendous. We had that expose a while ago, and they've since, been fixed, I think, in some way, shape or form. But if you leave them open to interpretation, you're going to get loads of different ways in which they may either be used or completely ignored or abused across the company.
I think having the list of what you're not going to do, so the what you're going to tolerate, really resonated with me, because I guess you get what you tolerate, don't you? So if you tolerate everything that could possibly go into this amorphous blob, like the valued behaviors, and that's a good one. Because you need to not do something, you need to not accept stuff to like have any sort of standard, don't you? It reminded me of a potentially career limiting move of when the MD of the UK of my corporate job sent out an email. He probably read the book of like, we should think about doing things and other things and other things, and we shouldn't draw limitations where there aren't any. So like, and again, I was working in supply chain at the time, which had a completely different culture than the rest of the company. So we're getting absolutely beaten. I'm like, let's send him an email. Like, so you want us to do loads of stuff? Because you can't have. Well, you can. I get his point, but like, what? How is that going to drive down to like what we're deciding today, tomorrow? Like we would need to reduce stock costs, stock holding, and improve service, and increase sales, and decrease cost in the breweries, and do like the maths don't go together. I get what you're saying. We can do them all together, but like, what are we not going to do? Because we're getting more new product development, like adding complexity in. We're getting more demand. It's like, what's going to give? And so like, we've got a million things to do. We want to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and saying like a list of 300 things. And to be fair to him, he's like, yeah, let's go and have a chat. So I got to have a chat with the MD when I was quite low down, which was good. But yeah, I think it's really important. It's like, what are we not going to do?
Yeah,
in our values, like what is not tolerated. I think that's a really
that's a hard one for leaders to. I find at the moment that the managers and leaders are really happy to think about valued behaviors and what you reward and praise in the moment. We value speaking up, for example, and then you in a meeting, Gavin, say, I don't understand this. I'm just raising my hand. I know it's a value that we should do that. And then I, as your manager, would say, Gavin, I'm really glad that you did that. And I bet other people around the room have benefited from you saying that. Well done. That's an easy thing for a manager to do, powerful to do. But what's not as easy is to is to deal with an untolerated behavior in the same environment, but it is, if not as powerful, if not more powerful. And the one that always comes up is the high performer in the team that says something that is inappropriate or against a company value, and them not being dealt with. It just says to everybody else, it doesn't matter, and then you lose all credibility on anything you're trying to do on culture. You've got to address the non-tolerated behaviors as much as the valued behaviors.
Yeah, interesting. Push you for one, but have you got what's the one tip that if you could give to a generic small, medium-sized business to make work more fun, even? What would it be?
Yeah, all right. So I think if I could give one bit of advice, I think the most compelling research that I'm finding at the moment is around social connections in an organization. If there's one bit of advice I'd give any company right now to give yourselves a better chance of succeeding, to attract the best talent, and to make it a really healthy work environment, is to be really intentional about the social connections in your organization. Help people get to know each other, and then help them build their social connections in your company. The amount of noise that will reduce, the amount of problems that will get solved faster, the amount of the impact it'll have on your retention rates, all of that will be so much more. They'll have such a positive impact as a result of you just thinking about how do you build social connections across your company. That is the one best bit of advice I could give right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it reminded me when I worked with Microsoft on workplace analytics, and they're big on scanning everyone's data, anonymizing it, and grouping up so you can see how people work together. Also, then organizational network analysis, see who's the linchpin and everyone goes to. And obviously they use it themselves, so they were sharing data from Microsoft, which admittedly is obviously a huge company. But they found out to be successful in sales, which is obviously highly technical sales, they need to get to the best performers, they need 70 close connections across different departments. And so they're well, if we and that takes 6 months for a new starter. So if we can speed up and help them get those connections faster, we're the amount, multiply that up by what Microsoft makes. Is if we get the new starters up to speed quicker and help them get those connections, we're going to make XYZ amount more money from each new starter and reduce that onboarding time.
But post-pandemic and hybrid working, typically networks have got smaller. And so it's something that I think if you invest in it now, you could really accelerate your performance against your competition as a result. But I don't think organizations are seeing that as a priority yet. But I think if I could give one bit of advice, that's the one.
Get ahead. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Sean. Is there any way, or what's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they're interested in anything that we've spoken about today?
Yeah, so my email is sean@craftyourculture.co.uk, sean@craftyourculture.co.uk, and I'm very present on LinkedIn. Borderline verbal diarrhea, but yes, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and I like to give away everything that I learn on that platform, which is potentially a really bad business model, but
I think it's one of the best business models. Yeah, give you away stuff for free, and people usually want to pay. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Sean. It's been really nice chatting today. Lovely to have you on the podcast. Hope you come on again at some point in the future. But yeah, thanks so much.
Loved it. Thanks very much for having me, Gavin.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Sean.